interestingly enough, these oil reserves that they tap into, apparently this idea that they would all be dried up doesn't seem to be the reality. They seem to
No,
be
they
replacing
replenish.
themselves. Yeah, they seem to be replenishing
Yeah.
themselves, which is amazing to think about. Because I guess if we were told that, fossil fuels was, decaying plant and animal matter over millions and billions of years, and there'd be a limited amount of it, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So, what could it be? What could this oil be? Where does it come from? And why does it replenish itself? These are, these are fascinating topics, but uh, we see this push towards this so-called renewable energy and this clean energy. I actually think that's the worst solution, because the clean energy technology seems to be more polluting than anything else. I mean, has anybody ever gone by like a windmill farm, like out like off the coast of a shoreline, or one of these these solar farms? I mean, come on. Or like, somebody said like fracking with the natural gas, where they make it seem as though like old energy is dirty energy, whether it's wood burning energy or coal. They don't think of it like that, and not even to bring up the whole nuclear energy thing, whether that's a thing and what that may be. But there's this promise of technology, but I think the more we become dependent on this technology, and the more centralized and quote unquote globalized the economy becomes, well, you can see the weakness there. It's kind of like your eggs in one basket. It's not, when you have a centralized, non-diverse economy, firstly, it's much easier to control that or to gain control of it. And then secondly, it becomes that much easier to destroy it and topple it to the point where you could just press a button and take the whole thing down. Like if you could wipe out the internet. So this promise of the technological age doesn't seem to be all it's cracked up to be and what it was promised to be. And it may be our downfall in some way. I don't know what you guys think, but there's this weird dichotomy that we can, think about when it comes to technology, the benefits and the limitations of it. But in my mind, the way I work it out, technology seems to have been a net, like a loss, like a detriment to society in the whole. That's just my point of view.
I really think it would depend what kind of technology. There is an argument to be made potentially with all the maybe quite recent quote-unquote overpopulation or just a sharp rise in population. That, I mean, certain things like sanitation and so on, would you count them as technology as well? Because they certainly make a difference, whether I need to walk half an hour to get fresh water or not.
Right. Or the benefits of, say, certain modern medical techniques, like say if you're in a car accident or you have some type of traumatic injury, and the ability to, be treated through medicine. And that's the plus of it.
As when we talk about maybe more advanced forms of energy or unknown forms, there was one German company, I'll make it short, they developed something, it was called GWE, a Blockheizkraftwerk, and they basically had put in water, and I think the output also was water, maybe with a little bit of some kind of an oil, but not much. Very effective. The guy started producing and actually made it very diligently and so on. And then they just put on some fake charges on him and basically raided his whole production. And apparently part of them were obviously military or Bundesnachrichtendienst, Secret Service or whatever. They spoke with this CEO guy who later reported it to some independent news outlets. And they told him, like, yeah, you have a really nice thing there with this Blockheizkraftwerk, and it basically creates no pollution. It's very effective. It's water or something like this. We really want to have this technology, and we would like to combine it with this Indian wind power company. And then for me, to my mind, immediately I went to the idea that, yeah, of course, that's what they're actually going to use. I even went so far just in my mind as to say, yeah, you have these offshore windmills, like you mentioned. Maybe on the bottom, you have one of these devices that's just highly effective. And then you could still tell everyone, oh, look, our great wind power, we're so green and sustainable. But actually you just use also maybe different clean technology that you simply sequestered from whoever you stole it from, basically, without disclosing it and allowing the benefits for everyone. But again, centralizing it and keep telling people whatever green agenda or whatever they have for whatever type of world shaping they imagine they must do.
Well, that's a great point. These hidden technologies. There's a lot of stories from the 1800s regarding these perpetual energy machines that operated on harmonics and resonance. The so-called 369 is the ratio. And apparently that's a real thing. This famous quote that's attributed to Tesla, this 369, it apparently seems to be the ratio encoding for harnessing resonant energy. And you said like water and stuff. They apparently were building these machines that employed water, small amounts of water, that were able to generate very large magnitude electrical energy and employ that energy through various machinery. And you really just need to know the ratio and to harness this idea of resonance. There's also a concept called cavitation, if you look into it, and the way that when water is oscillating at particular frequencies, it actually creates a very high magnitude electrical charge, which is the principle behind sonoluminescence, which can be seen if you've ever seen a lobster or a crab snap its claw underwater. You will see a very intense, bright electrical output, like a light underwater. And again, it's called sonoluminescence. A lot of people know what that is, but it's the idea
it's this
that
shrimp, this like a punching shrimp, this shrimp with this punch that can go like supersonic speed, and then when they
right.
actually punch, yeah.
So think
they
about
can produce
it.
this heat and light.
Exactly, and it's a process called cavitation, and anybody could look this up. So this is an idea that mechanical energy can be translated to electrical energy. So if you can employ this and you can harness the principles of resonance, well, imagine the capabilities. And even further, there was apparently multiple people, even before Tesla. You can look up a man, I think his last name is Woolley, and he was the precursor to Tesla. Tesla may have not even ever existed, and he was employing this 3-6 frequency. So apparently the ratio of 3/9 is the resonance ratio, and the 6/9 is the dissonance ratio. And you have to know how to balance these two principles. And apparently you create a perpetual motion with water that leads to very large electrical energy outputs. And apparently this was all real. This is known. Which, let's think of the implications. It means not only could you run like cars off of simple water, but really any large scale machinery. So the potential behind this is significant. Apparently it was squashed and basically replaced with this more modern type of energy that we see with this, like AC/DC electric currents and power plants, which basically work off steam energy and turbines. So it's the turbine that is used to create the electrical charge, whether it's steam or hydrodynamical, or you could just be a person or like a hamster wheel. Either way, it's a turbine. But apparently this is a very inefficient mode of energy production and then transfer, because you have to transfer that energy through the power lines. And you need things like way stations and things like that to boost it as you go. So there's so much really to this idea of harmonics, energy, frequency. And I agree with Raphael that there's probably people who still understand this technology. And, Either they're going to be just bought up or co-opted by some major conglomerate, or in other ways shut down.
What it always makes me think of course, we have now all of these memes with old architecture being resonators, all of that may well be. But in any case, even just the architecture, both on the large scale and also on the small scale decorations, basically anything that looks nice, I was always wondering, like, why even? And then when you look closer, what I would say I see in it is very often basically magnetic patterns, just as if you would have like, the sand with cymatics, or you would have like iron filings and put a magnet around it. You very oftentimes have these type of shapes and curves in decorations as well, which makes me think or gives credence to the idea that whoever was designing and building this, they had some connection to that principle. Whereas with all the modern brutalist architecture, it's only right angles, as we know, and no decoration too often, right?
Oh yeah, God, yeah. I mean, look at the Gothic, the so-called Gothic architecture that still exists. The beauty of it, it's completely stunning. And I agree with you. Compare that to the boxy type of engineering that we have today, with the right angles and square or rectangular rooms, and it's completely different. The idea of the arch and these great cathedral and these domes, and again, they're still standing all these years later. So seems to have been an understanding that goes way back. And if anybody's interested, these things go back, and they're alluded to in the Bible, the Tanakh, or the Old Testament as it's commonly referred to, and throughout it. I mean, the secrets encoded in the story of Solomon's temple, they say it all. Why do you think there's so much of the Solomonic imagery represented in the Masonic order? It goes back. They say the original Mason was this Tubal Cain, who was the original smith, was the original ironsmith. There seems to have been in alchemy some kind of understanding of metallurgy, and it seemed to have been intimately linked with humanity at large, into all factors of humanity, probably even into things like health and well-being. Look at these great cathedrals, again, alluding to what Raphael was saying. The structure of these buildings may have been some type of technology, some type of energetic technology.
Yeah, so the way I like to combine it could both be like a low voltage nuclear power plant with the water below, for lack of a better term. At the same time, could be a healing frequency device with the organ, water purification at the same time through the organ. And even if we want to disregard all of the speculation for 1 second, what's obvious, I would claim, is if you enter any of these old world buildings, or even just look at them, it is uplifting to your mood. And even just that in itself should be, I want to say, a rainbow flag with a black sheep on it or whatever, to anyone, to be like, there's something there, obviously. And that's why everyone is attracted to it. But then they get diverted, by some priest and some donation box in the middle. But there's a natural attraction to that, whether it's genetic memory or just the golden ratio of the architecture or the type of quartz and stone that's used, that most likely has an effect, I'm going to speculate now, on the ions in the air in terms of how charged the air is, which is then makes you breathe easier. At the same time, could be something electromagnetic, again, with the composition of the stone itself even. So yeah, all these angles, which everyone can verify for themselves, there's something there. And then we look at all the effort and energy expended to obfuscate that. And then, even though I don't know what it is exactly, but I know something's there. And as you brought up metallurgy, immediately made me think of, Bronze Age, Iron Age, this and that, which honestly, I think I'm not tooting my horn too much if I say this, and I think I'm being honest, even in school didn't really make sense to me, to be like, and now we're waiting 10,000 years until we discover the next alloy. I mean, who can really believe that?
Well, that's the thing, that the common timeline and narrative associated with history, it seems to be quite implausible. Like you said, they just give everything enough time, and they just stretch everything out over some linear
Like
time
with
span.
evolution, like you mentioned, evolution. We have this infinite regression into the past, and that can explain away anything that doesn't make sense.
Right. You just give it enough time. So, it strains credibility to think how, I don't know, like a single-celled amoeba can form into like a complex, like a human or a giraffe or something. I don't know, but they just give it billions of years, and that somehow like makes it make more sense. What would the
Exactly.
threshold be? If they told us 100,000 years, would it make sense? Probably not. But when they put a billion behind it, and that somehow makes sense. And it's kind of the same thing with history, like you said. Just make it long enough, and then you have kind of like this progression through these ages. But that doesn't really seem to hold up to evidence and scrutiny. Because come on, I mean, the Gothic architecture alone is evidence of some advanced civilization. And they seem to be very intent on destroying these old world buildings and architecture. You look at these great fires that they had all across the world in the
All right.
1800s, and they seemingly were destroying this beautiful, inherited world that we
With
find
laser
ourselves in.
airships, probably, yes. I mean, it's all speculation, obviously, but yeah, all the great fires, everyone who hasn't looked into it, just enter Great Fire in any major American city, and you will find the Great Fire around 1900. The question I'd have for you, Z, and this is unfortunately, again, pure speculation, but going back to the ground we stand on, or me, I'm on the third floor, but still, what would be in terms of the evidence you can see, what would even be the best guess as to how long humans even live in Europe or America? Like, we have this old architecture, which, as David Ewing Jr. suggested, may actually have been upgraded only later, may have been simpler before, just as an industrial thing. So some of those may be more recent decorations. Maybe some are actually old and in association with more advanced architecture and capabilities. But even considering that, and especially understanding how faulty carbon dating is, as Anatoly Fomenko explains in great detail, for example, what do we even have to glean in terms of what is the oldest true, somewhat verifiable, trustworthy proof we have of human existence in Europe or America? How many years would that actually go back?
I mean, that's a great question. All I could say is, I don't know, but I'll answer it like this. From my studies into the mystery schools, whether it's what could be considered the Rosicrucian Brotherhood, the ideas carried even into the, these like the Order of the Golden Dawn and all these things, and the Theosophists. I mean, the Theosophical Society seemed to be involved in a lot of the effery going on, the rewriting of history, into this modern form. But when I've investigated as a whole the underlying principles of these secret occult brotherhoods, one of the fundamental understandings reported is that the Americas were apparently a great so-called ancient civilization that was destroyed somewhere around 10 to 12,000 years ago, and is what is commonly considered the mythical Atlantis. All right. So apparently Atlantis wasn't some island city. That would more accurately be referred to as Poseidonis, which apparently was the last vestige of this great Atlantean empire that was the last to be destroyed. So according to the occultists, the North and Central Americas were the seat of a great civilization that existed 10,000 years ago. That was the actual prototype and precursor civilization to all modern humanity, which would mean it preceded the Mesopotamian Fertile Crescent story, the Babylonians. So this is an idea that these proto-humans actually formed here in the Americas. Now, I look at it like this. Okay, that might be true, that might not be true. And in addition to that, maybe it wasn't 10 or 12,000 years ago. Maybe that timeline is much more recent. But I do
I'm
think
about to
there,
say, yeah. Mhm.
yeah, because regardless of the timeline, I think there's credence to the story. I think it's quite possible that the earliest civilization we could find is not traced back to the Chaldeans and the Babylonians. I would actually trace the earliest
Yes.
civilization to the Americas, which would mean that after the fall of the so-called Atlantis, it seems as though the remnants would be considered the what we call the Mayans, and that the Mayans were actually the precursor civilizations to not only what we find throughout Eurasia, but also the Far East, and were the prototype civilizations of the Vedics and so on. And you also see the commonality of the serpentine deities. So in the Mayan civilization and Aztecs, we hear references to Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl, were these great dragon-like serpentine gods. If you look to the Sumerians and their understanding of their gods, the Anuna, you find that there were these winged serpentine-like beings. This archetype was carried into the Egyptian culture, into the Sphinx and Phoenix-like presentations. Again, serpentine, winged, lion-like creatures. You then see this carried over even into the Israelite tradition regarding the Yahweh figure, and also the angels referenced in the Old Testament, like the seraphim and the cherubim. So when you look at all of these, we find there is a serpentine presentation to these so-called gods that I feel can be traced back to this proto-civilization that followed Atlantis that can be found in the Central Americas.
I can't figure out why exactly this snake or then winged serpent would be the symbol, and also still the very common trope, even on the Russian flag or the Muscovite flag or Russian coat of arms. You actually always have this depiction, of Saint George slaying the dragon, basically. And do you have any working hypothesis as to who or what the dragon is? Because it may even well be, so either they were real, beasts or demons or something running around, or it could actually represent, let's say, back then, also Dugin confirms this, Alexander Dugin, basically the Muscovite conquering of what we today call modern day Russia. And at this, we have the evidence with up to 1910 Tartar city in Beijing, that maybe this could have been one of the last holdouts that was somewhat organized, and that this is how this symbolism may at least partially come to be, that the snake or the dragon maybe was some kind of old world symbol or other power structure, and that was ultimately conquered by whoever St. George is supposed to represent. Although I believe even here there's the question if this could also relate to some prophets or something. It's all really murky and mixed up, but I'd be curious what you say.
Very interesting. Well, we also see representations even in the Gaelic culture to the idea of the Druids being a snake-like culture with a snake-like serpentine philosophy, and the idea of the driving out of the snakes of, I believe it was St. Patrick.
Yes.
Which would be analogous to driving out of the Druid knowledge. It appears as though the early Christians, the so-called Gnostics, as I believe both of you are well acquainted with, the Cathars, the Bogomines, they appear to have had a serpentine understanding also. So I actually, to answer your question, see it more as a literal understanding. Also, my study into the Old Testament, the Tanakh, has led me to the belief that the God of the Israelites, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, this so-called Yahweh or Yahovah, was a serpentine dragon-like God. And I can go into it if you want. I mean, they were slaughtering cattle by the hundreds and thousands to this God. Now, do you think they were just leaving this cattle like in a field to rot? Or is it possible that they were feeding this serpentine god. And in return for their service, he protected them, fought their wars, promised them land, things like that. Again, back to the Aztecs, the Mayans, it seems as though they were very intimately connected with their serpentine winged god.
But just
And
to
again,
understand, we would be talking about the physicalized manifestation of something akin to a dragon or whatever, which, by the way, I want to point out, even in Austria, in Carinthia, you have something called the Lindwurm, which basically also is like a snake dragon thing. And it's so popular, and I'm sure there's some myths about it, but nobody ever connected to anything else.
oh, yeah, interesting. There's so many points. And again, if we want to look at the early cuneiform writings from the Sumerian culture, we find a story of these fallen beings, much like is found in the Bible. That's how I conjecture it. To me, there seems to be some interaction with humans from these beings that were not from here specifically or conventionally, and that they somehow were intimately involved with early humankind in some way. Even the apocryphal book of Enoch, that, incidentally was not included in the 66 canonical books of the Bible, but was referenced multiple times within those books. The Enoch seems to be a real book, and we find the story of the fallen, these fallen entities that basically made a pact with each other in regard to how they would interact with mankind. And along with that story is this understanding that was somehow forbidden or forebodden by some other larger authority, godlike figure. But again, interesting that the serpentine quality seems to run through all of these. The serpent in the garden, we're presented with a serpent that tempted man, that led to the fall of man. So, I mean, how could we overlook the almost ubiquitous presentation around the world through multiple cultures throughout history, regardless of the timeline, of these serpents? So there has to be something to it. And like you said, in these multiple flags, whether it's dragons or serpents, or you'll often see eagle depiction. I mean, if we look at not only the United States, but also the Roman Empire, and even the so-called Nazis, the National Socialist Party of Germany, they all had the eagle as the representation in their iconography. Well, some think that the eagle is actually more of a representation of like a flying serpentine being, like a phoenix or a dragon. So you have this idea of the phoenix versus the snake. Some cultures conjecture it as a battle between these somehow non-human royalty, almost these brothers. If you look at the Sumerians, they speak of Enki and Enlil, which I think is what you see carried over into the Hebrew Bible, of the so-called Yahweh figure juxtaposed with the Satan figure. The Gnostics called it the demiurge, and the Gnostics said that the demiurge Yahweh was a dragon. That's the fundamental understanding of the Gnostics. Well, let's go back to the Jesuits. Why was the Roman Catholic Church so intent on destroying all vestiges of these early Gnostic understandings? Well, maybe they were onto something. Maybe their understanding of this God of the Old Testament went against the agenda purported by the Catholic Church, who want to purport this God as, the Holy Father, the creator of this world, the creative spirit. Again, I mean, this idea of these serpent gods to me is increasingly fascinating. Look, in the Roman Catholic religion, they consider 9 orders of the angelic realm, and the highest orders are serpentine angels, the seraphim and the so-called cherubs. They were winged, and they had scale-like serpentine qualities. Landed on this. If you look up the word seraphim, which is the highest order of angel, seraph means snake.
Yeah, the burning serpent, something like this. One reference I saw, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The burning serpent. I mean, yeah, you can go back to the Old Testament talks about burning serpents multiple times. Moses held up his staff with the caduceus snakes. Well, I mean, it's possible that maybe many or all the animals that we see, and even plant life, could be the result of some type of genetic manipulation. There's many stories about humans and genetic manipulation, like what we may be. The story of like Adam, or even some of the Vedic stories, like Manu from the Vedic culture, which was apparently the progenitor of mankind, and these stories that, these stories that mankind was somehow manufactured, created in a way.
Manu is the Indian version of Noah. Basically, there was a big ship involved, and actually, there's a Manu temple not too far away from me. But the valley that I'm in, this is called Kulu Valley, Parvati Valley. They say that it was flooded here, and then Manu stranded his ship, and that's like the beginning of the civilization. I'm in the Indus Valley, so like so the three like places is the Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley is like the cradle of civilization, some people say.
Interesting, because the Sumerians referred to their Noah archetype as Adrahasis. Some people associate Zayasudra with Noah. Some people say Gilgamesh, which again, okay, let's think about this. Indications of worldwide cataclysm and flood. And back to the earlier topic, this flood of Noah could have been on a much more recent timeline that's been presented to us.
I mean, maybe what we can bring it back to, and maybe Z, you can comment on that, which would be potentially the highest level discussion of all of this, if this is correct, the whole thing about the 33rd degree. So I'm not sure to what extent, Z, you heard about this, and maybe this would also be something alarming to me, because according to David Jung Jr., even on the higher echelons of whatever power structure we have set up here, the people and the groups are actually fighting about whether God is something to be contained within materiality, so within the 33rd degree, or maybe within the snowball we're inside, or whatever it is, or whether God actually is some type of transcendent absolute force that is beyond this realm, and therefore also cannot possibly be trapped or ensnared within this realm, which the adherents of the inside 33rd degree, also with the whole third temple thing in Jerusalem and all of that, they appear to want to bring about. And yeah, maybe it'd be alarming to me if fundamentally, if this is correct, that much of the world's misery is only because of an inability to find common ground between these two ideological, spiritual positions. That would maybe be the most alarming to me, if that is the fundamental core issue that people are having, because maybe it is possible that this really cannot be easily verified in a way that everyone agrees with. So even given all the technology and knowledge available, it maybe still is a contentious point fundamentally. But then to imagine people on that level fighting over that, and because of that, everyone else suffering, that'd be really alarming. But I can imagine it.
Well, that question is actually the fundamental question of all philosophy. It's basically the question, you have absolutism versus materialism, or idealism versus materialism, or the objective versus the subjective. That's the fundamental core of all philosophical thought, is, do things exist, whether it's God or morality, or in the objective, in the absolute, or is everything relegated to the subjective materialistic world? And this is the great divide. And I wouldn't be surprised if this was a great divide even amongst the high-level elites, the top of the capstone people, because this is really what it comes down to, the material world versus the spiritual conscious world. But I will say this, again, if you study the writings and the understandings of the mystery schools, and I implore anybody to check out the understanding of the Rosicrucians, because they seem to be the modern underpinnings of all the occult brotherhoods that we see, right? They have a very particular understanding of reality. So to them, this material reality is more of a low frequency manifestation of some type of conscious or spiritual energy. And they actually have a tiered system. So above the material world, you would find the world of the astral and then the etheric realms. So these are realms that we can access through, let's say, dream states or astral travel, shamanistic experience, some type of maybe meditative Buddha-like experience would give you the ability to access the astral or the ethereal plane. But beyond that, they have what they call the mental plane or the plane of the mind. And then above that, they have the conscious plane. And then at the top would be the spiritual plane. So they have a very structured, tiered system of reality that places this physical reality basically pretty low, which I conjecture as a low frequency. So you would have like low frequency condensed energy that we perceive as material. So that's the best way I could explain my thought on the elites. Their religion, their doctrine seems to be embedded in this understanding. You know, it's been said that all is mind. If you look at the Hermetists and the writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, which again seems to be the underpinnings, these Hermetic principles seems to be the underpinnings of these modern occult brotherhoods, we find this understanding that the more pure reality, the more base reality is actually conscious, spiritual, and mental. And that this physical reality is just a manifestation, a lower frequency manifestation of that. And just to finish off, again, this idea of the third temple or placing God within this material realm, that's my analogy with, again, this God of the Old Testament, this God that will protect you, will fight your wars, will give you earthly provision, this God that will give you earthly riches if you serve it within this world. So again, we have a God that's defined by this material world, a God that is in charge of this world. And then we have the idea of a more etheric, a more spiritual, mental, and conscious God or creator. And incidentally, I think that more spiritual, conscious father was the one that the Christ figure was referencing as his father. And I think he was actively speaking out against the God of the Israelites in so many ways.
Welcome to the panel, Menestopheles.
What I've learned from tarot, for example, is that the lowest dimension, let's say, is at the same time in one perspective also the highest, you know, if that makes sense. Because like we have the highest concentration of all material like in the smallest space, let's say. I don't know if that makes sense. So I wouldn't say that it's the lowest vibration necessarily, if that makes sense.
Like, what are your own thoughts in regards to this?
It's kind of hard to explain, but like as so basically, I think you have a trickle down effect. Let's say in the if we view the world, let's say, as these different layers of ideation of creation, where the lowest is basically the most dense, and the higher up you go, the more free and open-ended it becomes, let's say. Because that's kind of what I gather from how Z was describing them. Then I think from one perspective, let's say, you could say that the lowest level is where all the energies from the levels above gather, you know, in a simple trickle down fashion, let's say. So in a way, we have all the we basically have all the materials, all the I'm not sure if material is even the correct word. All the energies from the higher planes at our disposal. We just don't know how to use them because, like, our perception is, how do you say, is kind of distorted or like twisted. Or the whole point is that the material plane where we're living is where everything needs to happen, where all this comes together, and where all the power is concentrated.
Yeah, go ahead. Z, did you want to say something?
I wanted to jump off what he said about density, and how we have a particular density here. Well, what if this idea of these higher energetic realms is not only spiritual or energetic, but what if it's literal? Because what do we know? We know there is a density gradient here on Earth. We know at the bottom of the Mariana Trench how dense that the water is there, and then we know how there's a density gradient regarding like air, or what we call air. Well, what if this density gradient continues through realms that we can't perceive? So we know they say there's different levels of heaven, what we call the cosmos. And, what if it's not like a hard dome over us, or like the vastness of space, like science says? What if it is these progressively less dense layers of reality as we go up through the heavens? And it's literal. As you go up, it's less dense, because like as he said, we're in a dense realm, and there's a less dense realm above us, and realms below us would then be more dense.
No, for sure, I can believe that. Yeah.
So maybe there's a literal correlation with physical density and this energetic density. So there's a million ways to look at it, and then it gives us a different idea of what the heavens are. The Hermetists basically were responsible for this saying, as above, so below. Because interestingly enough, their view is that the fundamental principles govern all realities, okay? All densities of reality. So it's the same rules. There seems to be a masculine and a feminine. That's one of the principles. Everything seems to be in motion, and not just in motion, but in oscillation, which seems to be harmonic, like a swing back and forth. Now, my concept is that as we proceed higher in consciousness into these less dense realms, that the swing, the oscillation becomes less and less, more tempered, until we finally reach the ultimate singularity of the creator that actually surpasses dualism and can be considered a singularity, a realm or an entity that's beyond these rules that govern the material or these different spiritual and energetic realms. That's the way I look at it. I kind of see it in that capacity. That's my view. To me, it's all energy and vibration along a grand spectrum of frequency, because that's how energy works. All energy is vibratory, whether it's sound energy, whether it's electrical energy. There's a vibratory component to it, no matter how you look. And when you look at vibration, you find that there's a spectrum of energy produced, because it goes along the harmonics. So I typically put it like this: if you were to pluck a guitar string, there's a sound that you perceive, which is the fundamental, which is the base vibration. But you also have multiple harmonics, which are basically successive doublings of that fundamental frequency all the way up. So this is how it works. So not only is that guitar string vibrating the length of the string, but there's nodal points in between that are doubling. And in between each nodal point is another nodal point, in theory, up to infinity. So my point is that energy exists along a spectrum. And I view this reality in the same manner, that it exists along a spectrum, and that we seem to be inhabiting a particular frequency bandwidth along this great spectrum of energy. And, people want to say, what's the prime force behind it? Well, the prime motivator, that's God, that's source, however you want to conceive that. So that's my concept of reality. And through that lens, it gives me a particular paradigm through which I view this world. And, that's why concepts for me, like a rising earth that's level, and perpendicular to an upward vector is completely plausible to me. It makes sense. If consciousness is rising, if we are on a journey through consciousness, progressing towards some point of either enlightenment or a destination back to source creation, well, what are we doing? We're rising. Why not this earth?
I think because it's very significant what you're saying, because I think you're right about that. But what I think happens when you reach a higher state of consciousness is that actually the entire world also levels up with you, if that makes sense. Because suddenly your reality changes as well. You start seeing things, you start perceiving, so synchronicities and stuff like that you start perceiving and things like that. You start how do you say, you start predicting things, and things start happening and things like that. So it's almost like your own transcendence, let's say, helps the world transcend as well. And I think what basically happens is like you said with the guitar chords, with all the different notes in between particular sounds, or like on top of a particular sound, in the same way you just how do you say, you just kind of harmonize with a higher frequency of reality, and suddenly that becomes your new reality.
Well, I think there's a lot to what you're saying about the energy that we're generating and radiating. I think will affect us in a lot of ways in the outside world. Again, it comes back to resonance. It's all about, again, it's all about harmonic
Exactly.
motion. You seem to harmonize with energies. Energies seem to harmonize. There's resonance and dissonance, right? There's harmony and there's disharmony. And these, I think, again, are the fundamental building blocks of this reality. And people want to call this New Age, but this is what is spoken about in all the occulted writings of the ancients. This is the stuff that they were talking about. The stuff that we have through the old Egyptian writings, and again carried through the mystery schools. They had this understanding that you can, in many ways, affect your reality with your energy. So again, that begs the question. So how can we manage our energy? What practices can we employ to manifest certain states of consciousness? What that means. And then on the other side of it, think about what this modern culture does to the energy that we're all individually embodying. You have this mass media, you have this society, this overly technological society that keeps us busy constantly. We have artificial electromagnetic signals everywhere, from radio to Wi-Fi to radar, microwave, X-ray. There's so many things now that appear to be interfering with the natural resonance and harmony of this reality in the world around us. There has to be components to that. It's a big deal, this energetic concept. It's probably underlies all health and well-being. It's probably the key to unlock wellness, to thwart against disease states, dysfunctional states. It's probably really all about the kind of energy that you're discussing. But again, how to manifest, how to cultivate that, and there seems to be a collective aspect to it. So think about how we exist in this modern culture and the collective energy of people. Well, if you're trying to be a being of consciousness, a being of light, or just a higher minded person, but yet you're in an environment that is completely opposed to that has to have an effect. It has to, because if people can resonate with each other, see, then it becomes a synchrony where the whole is greater than the sum of its part. And I think that's the thing that's overlooked, because people have a linear mindset on things. It's like a 1-to-1 equation, a zero-sum game. But if you really study the principles of resonance, you find that it's not a zero-sum game.